The first sign that the wedding did not exist was printed in 6 words. Jasmine was never meant to read. Bride identity pending final authorization. The phrase appeared at the top of a seating chart that slipped from Alexander Whitmore's folder while he stepped outside to take a call. And for several seconds, Jasmine simply stared at the empty space where a woman's name should have been. The ceremony was 12 weeks away. 112 guests had already been assigned tables, and several vendors had received deposits large enough to support Jasmine's company through an entire season. Yet no bride had attended a meeting, approved a design, requested a dress fitting, or spoken with the planner expected to shape one of the most personal days of her life. Jasmine had handled confidential weddings for public figures before, but secrecy still required consent, and nothing about the document in front of her suggested the unseen woman had given any. Alex returned to the conference room carrying the same controlled expression he wore through every negotiation, though it changed when he saw the page beneath Jasmine's hand. She did not accuse him of fraud or raise her voice. She turned the chart toward him and asked whether Brooks and Bloom had been hired to plan a wedding or to conceal one. Alex closed the door, remained standing for a moment, then admitted the event was not yet attached to a confirmed couple. He described it as a private foundation project examining how people made commitments when family pressure, wealth, and public image interfered with honest choice. The ceremony would function as a prototype for a filmed educational program, and if no couple freely chose to use it, the venue would become a benefit gala instead. Jasmine listened until he finished, then asked why he had introduced himself as the groom. Alex did not offer a polished answer. He said the foundation's attorneys believed a fictional groom would protect the participants' identities until the selection process ended, and he had agreed to serve as the public point of contact. Jasmine reminded him that protecting private information did not require misleading the professional responsible for the event. Alex accepted the criticism and offered to terminate the agreement, pay every outstanding invoice, and compensate her company for the dates it had reserved. The offer was financially generous, but Jasmine had spent years learning that money could make an unfair situation look reasonable without making it right. She told him she would continue only if she received the full project structure, direct access to the independent ethics advisor, and written authority to suspend any decision that crossed professional boundaries. The revised agreement arrived the following morning, accompanied by a video meeting with the documentary producer, outside counsel, and an ethics consultant named Dr. Lena Price. They confirmed that no engagement existed, no marriage license would be filed, and no participant could be approached romantically through the project without independent consent. One participant had entered the evaluation process, while a second person would be considered only after an authentic relationship developed outside any employment, sponsorship, or financial dependency. Jasmine asked whether Alex was personally involved, but Lena said participant identities remained protected, even from vendors, until disclosure became necessary. The refusal irritated Jasmine, although the rules themselves sounded more careful than the original explanation. She returned to Whitmore Holdings 2 days later with a revised design plan built around adaptable values rather than an imagined bride. Instead of asking Alex how the couple met, she asked what the program hoped participants would understand before choosing marriage. He answered that a ceremony should feel like a place where neither person had to perform a version of themselves to remain loved. His voice lost its corporate certainty when he said it, and Jasmine noticed the shift without assigning meaning to it. She had learned that clients often revealed private wounds through hypothetical questions, especially when discussing promises they feared they could not keep. Over the next month, they toured estates, rooftops, museums, and botanical gardens throughout New York and Connecticut. Alex evaluated budgets and logistics with relentless discipline, while Jasmine focused on emotional clarity, asking whether each space encouraged intimacy or merely displayed wealth. During one visit, she mentioned that she preferred conservatories because living things made elaborate ceremonies feel less artificial. Alex wrote something in the leather notebook he carried to every meeting, then asked what kind of music allowed vows to remain central instead of becoming another performance. Jasmine answered that a string quartet usually created warmth without overwhelming the room. She began noticing how often his questions moved beyond the project. He wanted to know why couples avoided difficult conversations, why some marriages survived public failure, and whether honesty could be learned by someone raised to believe vulnerability invited exploitation. Jasmine answered professionally, yet the questions remained with her after meetings ended. When she reviewed the updated planning file one Friday evening, she discovered that the conservatory, the string quartet, the cream peonies, and the small guest count had all been approved within hours of her mentioning them. None of the decisions violated the contract, but together they created a pattern too personal to ignore. The project claimed to be studying commitment, yet someone appeared to be building a ceremony from Jasmine's unguarded preferences, and she no longer knew whether the unseen participant was shaping the wedding at all. Jasmine stopped offering personal examples and began documenting every decision inside a separate file that only she and Emily could access. When Alex asked whether she preferred candlelight to overhead fixtures, she redirected the question toward accessibility, photography, and guest comfort. When he asked what made handwritten vows meaningful, she explained the professional advantages without mentioning that her parents had renewed theirs 6 months before announcing a divorce. Alex noticed the distance almost immediately, though he respected it rather than pressing for an explanation. His restraint should have reassured her, but it only sharpened the suspicion that he understood exactly why the boundaries had changed. Emily reviewed the documents one evening after the studio closed. She pointed out that every major design choice reflected something Jasmine had said before she realized the project might involve her personally. Jasmine insisted the pattern still proved nothing, because experienced planners naturally influence the events they designed. Emily agreed, then asked why Alex's notebook contained private observations instead of vendor specifications. Jasmine had no answer, and the silence between them carried the possibility neither wanted to name. If Alex had developed feelings while employing her, the project could no longer remain ethically neutral even if he never acted on them. Margaret Whitmore complicated matters by inviting Jasmine to lunch at the family estate, presenting the meeting as a discussion about donor expectations. The house overlooked the Hudson River and carried the preserved elegance of a family accustomed to turning history into authority. Margaret spoke about guest lists, social alliances, and the importance of presenting stability during a difficult year for Whitmore Holdings. Jasmine reminded her that the ceremony might become a benefit event without any wedding, but Margaret replied that Alexander had always needed time to understand what he wanted before saying it aloud. The sentence felt less like speculation than knowledge. Charles entered during dessert and objected to the modest scale of the design. He argued that donors expected spectacle from the Whitmore name and questioned why the foundation had committed millions to an experiment that still lacked a second participant. Margaret attempted to stop him, but Charles continued long enough to reveal that Alex had personally requested Jasmine's company before the documentary team interviewed other planners. He called the decision another example of his son allowing private judgment to interfere with institutional responsibility. Jasmine left before coffee, carrying a new fact Alex had never disclosed. She requested a private meeting with Lena and asked to review the original vendor selection timeline. The records showed that Alex had recommended Brooks and Bloom 3 months before Jasmine entered the conference room, citing several weddings she designed and an interview in which she discussed emotional safety during ceremonies. Lena confirmed that the recommendation did not violate project rules, because participants could suggest professionals whose work aligned with the program. However, she also admitted the ethics board had warned Alex against direct supervision once he became personally interested in Jasmine's perspective. He had argued that replacing himself would expose participant information and disrupt the project. Was he already the participant? Jasmine asked. Lena refused to answer, explaining that disclosure required the participants' consent or a formal finding of conflict. Jasmine then asked whether the board had documented such a conflict. Lena said the matter remained under review because Alex denied any intention to pursue Jasmine while the contract existed. The distinction might have protected the project legally, but it did not protect Jasmine from being observed inside meetings she believed were purely professional. She confronted Alex at the conservatory the following afternoon. Workers were measuring the central aisle, while sunlight moved through the glass ceiling and cast shifting patterns across the floor. Jasmine waited until they were alone, then asked why he had selected her company before the supposed bride existed. Alex answered that he admired her work and believed she understood the purpose of the project better than larger firms. Jasmine placed the vendor timeline beside his notebook and told him admiration did not explain why every design reflected her preferences. Alex remained silent, and for the first time she saw uncertainty defeat preparation. He admitted that the project had become personal after they began working together, but insisted he never planned a proposal, public reveal, or forced romantic outcome. He said he had avoided expressing interest because any approach while he controlled her contract would be coercive. Jasmine believed that part, yet the careful restraint did not erase how he had gathered intimacy through paid access. She asked directly whether he was participant 1. Alex said he could not answer without violating the review process, and Jasmine heard the familiar protection of procedure replacing honesty. You keep telling yourself that because you did not ask for anything, you did not take anything, she said. You took my unguarded answers and used them to imagine a future I never agreed to discuss. Alex looked at the notebook as though its pages had changed in front of him. Jasmine suspended the project immediately and told him every future decision would belong to the independent review, not to either of them. The suspension placed Brooks and Bloom in immediate financial danger. Jasmine had hired 2 assistants, declined 7 spring weddings, and committed deposits to vendors who had held dates for months. Whitmore Holdings offered full reimbursement, but accepting payment before the review ended could make her company appear willing to trade silence for survival. Emily supported the suspension while privately calculating how many weeks remained before payroll consumed their reserve. For the first time, Jasmine understood why professionals sometimes stayed inside compromised arrangements, even after recognizing the harm. Principles became harder to defend when other people's rent depended on them. The independent review examined contracts, emails, security records, calendar invitations, design notes, and every recorded project meeting. Investigators found no hidden cameras, false engagement documents, or plan to surprise Jasmine with a proposal. They did, however, uncover several warnings from Lena, advising Alex to transfer supervision after he began asking that Jasmine's personal preferences shape the ceremony. In one email, the documentary producer wrote that the project risked becoming an unauthorized courtship disguised as research. Alex replied that he had no intention of approaching Jasmine and believed ending the contract would damage her business more than continuing professionally. The explanation exposed the flaw at the center of his judgment. Alex had recognized the imbalance and still decided he could manage it privately, trusting his restraint more than Jasmine's right to understand the situation. The review concluded that he had violated ethical boundaries without planning a romantic trap. The finding was less dramatic than the rumors would later become, but more damaging to Jasmine because it confirmed the violation had developed gradually through choices he considered responsible. Daniel Ross met with Jasmine and Emily to present compensation for documented losses, canceled clients, legal expenses, and reputational harm. No confidentiality clause required Jasmine to protect Alex, and no payment depended on forgiveness or future contact. Jasmine accepted only the losses necessary to keep her employees working, rejecting additional damages that felt punitive rather than restorative. She told Daniel that Alex's wealth allowed him to make mistakes without fearing eviction, while her company had spent weeks calculating whether honesty would force it to close. Daniel answered that Alex had made the same point during the board review and requested that the compensation come from his personal holdings rather than the foundation. Before the final report became public, Margaret visited Jasmine's office. She admitted encouraging Alex to join the commitment project after his previous engagement ended in humiliation. His former fiancée had sold private messages to a tabloid after learning he intended to leave, and the experience hardened Alex's belief that affection surrounding his family could never be separated from access or status. Margaret thought a structured evaluation process would protect him from manipulation. Jasmine listened without softening the central truth. "You built a system to protect him from being used," she said. Nobody asked how the system might let him use someone else. Margaret accepted the rebuke and revealed that Charles intended to suppress the report because Whitmore Holdings was negotiating a public offering. Alex had refused, arguing that concealment would force Jasmine to carry rumors without access to the truth. He resigned from the foundation project and agreed to step away from company leadership until an outside committee reviewed his judgment. Jasmine did not mistake the decision for romance. It was simply the first time Alex had accepted a consequence he could not privately control. The report became public through a formal statement acknowledging that a foundation participant had developed an undisclosed personal interest in a contracted professional. Although the statement protected Jasmine's name, reporters identified Brooks and Bloom through vendor permits and venue reservations. Within 2 days, headlines claimed a billionaire had secretly hired a woman to plan her own wedding. The fiction was irresistible because it transformed exploitation into fantasy and erased every boundary Jasmine had fought to defend. She held a brief press conference outside her studio. There was no engagement, no proposal, and no secret bride, she said. A professional relationship became ethically compromised because one person had access, money, and information the other did not. That is not a fairy tale. 2 clients canceled that afternoon, fearing publicity, while 3 younger couples requested consultations because they admired her refusal to romanticize the situation. Alex did not contact her. He canceled the ceremony prototype, released every vendor, and allowed the conservatory to keep the deposits for community programming. His silence protected Jasmine from another attempt to shape her response, yet it also left her alone with a public story neither of them recognized. Months later, when she spoke at an industry conference about consent and power, an audience member asked whether people who violated trust deserved another chance. Jasmine paused before answering. "Change may deserve recognition," she said. "It does not automatically deserve access to the person who was harmed." Alex heard the recording during a mandatory leadership seminar arranged by Whitmore Holdings, and the sentence followed him more persistently than any criticism inside the ethics report. He had assumed accountability would eventually produce a clean conclusion: acknowledge the violation, pay the losses, surrender authority, and become better through discipline. Jasmine's words exposed another habit of control. Even remorse could become a strategy if he treated growth as a path back to her instead of a responsibility that remained necessary without reward. During his leave, Alex continued therapy with a counselor unaffiliated with the foundation and began tracing the pattern beyond his failed engagement. His family had praised preparation as maturity and treated uncertainty as negligence. When people resisted, Alex offered better plans until agreement seemed reasonable. Because his decisions often worked, no one had taught him to recognize the difference between protecting someone and removing their freedom to choose discomfort. He sold his interest in the abandoned documentary project and created an independent grant program for small creative businesses harmed by contract disputes or media exposure. Outside trustees controlled the fund, Whitmore branding was prohibited, and Brooks and Bloom was barred from applying. The restriction mattered because Alex understood that any benefit reaching Jasmine through his money could become pressure, disguised as generosity. He returned to the company in a reduced role after agreeing that foundation projects involving individuals would require independent consent audits. Jasmine learned about these changes through public filings and industry contacts rather than messages sent to attract her attention. The absence of pursuit allowed her anger to become less absolute. She no longer needed Alex to be monstrous in order to justify leaving, nor did his loneliness transform the violation into an accident. He had been thoughtful in many moments, and entitled in one that mattered deeply. Both truths could remain present without canceling each other. Brooks and Bloom recovered through an unexpected shift in clientele. Couples began seeking Jasmine because she asked difficult questions before accepting deposits. She and Emily developed a consent-based planning process requiring both partners to approve budgets, family involvement, publicity, and major design choices. The policy sometimes exposed conflicts that ended engagements before expensive ceremonies began, costing the company revenue but strengthening its reputation. Jasmine discovered that professional growth could emerge from harm without turning the harm into something she was grateful to have endured. Near the end of summer, the Botanical Conservatory invited Brooks and Bloom to organize a fundraising gala for apprentices entering event design, floral work, catering, and music production. Whitmore Holdings was one of several sponsors, although the contract granted sponsors no creative authority. Jasmine accepted after confirming Alex would attend only scheduled committee meetings. Avoiding every place connected to him would allow the past to narrow her choices, and she refused to confuse self-protection with permanent retreat. Their first meeting involved 12 people around a long table. Alex greeted her with the same courtesy he offered everyone else, contributed only when the agenda required it, and left without requesting a private conversation. During later sessions, he supported the governance rules when donors tried to pressure Jasmine into replacing local vendors with luxury brands. He never invoked his history with her or framed his support as proof of change. His actions became noticeable precisely because they did not demand acknowledgement. After one meeting, they waited beneath the conservatory entrance while heavy rain delayed both cars. Alex asked whether the new planning policy had helped her company. Jasmine said it had changed which clients they accepted, then asked whether returning to Whitmore Holdings felt different. He answered that authority now frightened him in a useful way because he had learned how easily access could silence disagreement before anyone recognized silence as harm. The conversation remained brief, ordinary, and unexpectedly comfortable. Weeks later, Jasmine found Alex's leather notebook beneath a chair after the committee left. She held it long enough to feel the old curiosity return, imagining answers hidden inside pages that once contained observations about her. She did not open it. Instead, she handed it to security and sent a message through the committee coordinator. That choice clarified what months of analysis had failed to explain. Trust was not the certainty that another person held no secrets. It was knowing uncertainty did not entitle either person to cross a boundary. The gala was scheduled for September, but 3 days before opening, a major sponsor threatened to withdraw unless Jasmine removed an apprenticeship category for undocumented young workers. The lost funding would cancel half the scholarships. Alex could replace the money personally within minutes, yet doing so would restore the very imbalance both of them had spent months confronting. Jasmine now faced a choice between protecting the program's independence and allowing dozens of apprentices to lose opportunities because principal had become expensive again. Jasmine refused the sponsor's demand and announced that the gala would proceed with a reduced program unless the committee found replacement funding through approved channels. Alex offered no private check and did not ask what she wanted him to do. Instead, he proposed that every sponsor receive the same opportunity to increase its contribution under the existing governance rules, with no additional branding or control. The committee approved the plan, though Charles warned that public disagreement could embarrass Whitmore Holdings during a sensitive quarter. The appeal raised only half the missing amount by the morning of the gala. Jasmine considered reducing each scholarship rather than eliminating candidates, but doing so would make several placements impossible because tools, transportation, and tuition costs could not be divided symbolically. Emily suggested postponing the awards until another fundraiser, yet the apprentices had already turned down temporary work based on promised placements. Jasmine felt the familiar weight of principle pressing against other people's livelihoods. Alex asked to speak during the committee's final emergency meeting. He proposed that Whitmore Holdings redirect its existing sponsorship from decorative installations toward scholarships leaving the overall contribution unchanged. The conservatory could replace the decorations with work produced by apprentices, while local businesses would receive paid contracts under the same budget. The solution preserved governance, avoided personal rescue, and placed more responsibility in the hands of the people the event intended to support. Jasmine approved it with the rest of the committee, recognizing that Alex had finally used planning to expand choice rather than control it. The gala opened beneath a clear September sky. Apprentice florists created centerpieces from donated branches and late-season flowers. Culinary students prepared dinner beside experienced chefs, and young musicians performed near the fountain. The event looked less expensive than the original design, yet guests remained longer because every detail carried a visible human story. Jasmine watched apprentices explain their work to donors and realized the crisis had improved the evening without romanticizing the difficulty that created it. During the reception, a reporter approached and asked whether the event marked Jasmine's reconciliation with the billionaire who once planned her wedding in secret. Several guests turned toward them, and phones appeared almost immediately. Alex stepped forward, but he did not position himself beside Jasmine or answer on her behalf. "That description is false," he said. "Ms. Brooks was harmed by a project I allowed to become unethical. She does not owe the public a romantic ending because I accepted responsibility." He then stepped away, leaving Jasmine control of the conversation. Jasmine explained that accountability and affection were separate questions, and that women were often pressured to reinterpret violated boundaries as proof they were desirable. The exchange spread online before the gala ended, although public response focused more on the apprenticeship program than on speculation. By midnight, several industry groups had offered support for expanding Brooks and Bloom's consent-based planning model. After the guests left, Alex remained with volunteers folding chairs and carrying equipment. There were no reporters nearby, and no reason to perform usefulness. Jasmine watched him accept instructions from an 18-year-old apprentice who corrected the way he packed glassware, and Alex thanked her without embarrassment. The moment carried no dramatic weight, yet it reached Jasmine more deeply than every formal apology, because he appeared comfortable contributing, without directing the outcome. They walked through the conservatory after the final truck departed. Alex said the foundation board had offered to restart the documentary project with stricter safeguards, but he declined because emotional intimacy should not become institutional content simply because lawyers improved the forms. Jasmine told him she had forgiven him, though forgiveness had not restored the relationship or created an obligation. Alex said he understood and began moving toward the exit. "Would you like coffee sometime?" Jasmine asked. He stopped, clearly surprised, then waited rather than answering too quickly. Jasmine clarified that the invitation was personal, separate from work, and reversible if either of them felt the past distorted the present. Alex agreed and asked her to choose the place. Their first date took place in a crowded neighborhood cafe where no staff member knew his name. They spoke about ordinary things before approaching anything difficult. Jasmine learned he watched architecture documentaries when anxious and still called his late grandmother's disconnected telephone number on her birthday. Alex learned Jasmine feared deep water, sang badly while cooking, and abandoned law school because she wanted to create experiences rather than argue about damage after it happened. The relationship developed slowly, then nearly ended when Charles offered Brooks and Bloom a national contract without consulting Jasmine. Alex knew about the proposal, but assumed separating himself from negotiations protected her independence. Jasmine discovered his knowledge through Emily and accused him of withholding information again. Alex argued that disclosure could have influenced her decision, while Jasmine answered that silence had influenced it more. For 2 weeks, they stopped seeing each other, and neither knew whether good intentions had recreated the same wound in a smaller form. Alex requested one conversation without bringing a defense. He admitted that he had focused so completely on avoiding pressure that he again decided what information Jasmine should receive. The mistake lacked the scale of the original deception, but its shape remained familiar. Jasmine acknowledged that she had reacted to the old injury before allowing him to explain, yet she refused to minimize the pattern. They agreed that transparency would sometimes feel uncomfortable and still remain necessary. Jasmine rejected Charles's contract because its exclusivity terms threatened the company's independence. Alex did not replace it, negotiate around her, or present an alternative. He accepted that supporting her sometimes meant allowing a decision to cost both of them something. Their reconciliation occurred without ceremony, beginning when Jasmine called and asked whether he wanted dinner after a long week. The relationship moved forward because neither pretended the second conflict had proven their growth complete. A year after the gala, Alex asked whether Jasmine could imagine marriage with him. He carried no ring and had reserved no venue. They discussed money, family boundaries, careers, privacy, children, and the possibility that Whitmore wealth could quietly dominate decisions, even when both intended equality. The conversations lasted months and included arguments that exposed how differently they understood security. Jasmine refused to live at the family estate, while Alex initially believed a separate wing created sufficient independence. She told him physical distance mattered because boundaries became harder to defend when the people challenging them controlled the roof. They chose an apartment together in Brooklyn, close enough for Jasmine to walk to the studio and ordinary enough that Alex had to learn which night's garbage belonged on the curb. Their prenuptial negotiations nearly ended the relationship when the first draft described Brooks and Bloom as a liability requiring protection. Jasmine hired her own attorney and rejected the language. Alex initially defended the document as standard practice, then recognized that standard did not mean neutral when one side's wealth defined every risk. The final agreement protected both businesses, preserved separate property, and created no reward for silence. Alex proposed at home after dinner. He told Jasmine he loved the life they had built through repeated choices, and asked whether she wanted to continue it as his wife. She said yes, then asked whether he understood that marriage would not erase the history between them. Alex answered that forgetting it would make every lesson temporary. They planned the ceremony through Brooks and Bloom's consent-based process, assigning Emily as lead planner so Jasmine could remain a bride rather than an employee. The conservatory returned to the list only after they visited other venues together and independently chose it again. Jasmine selected the string quartet, while Alex requested greenery, grown from cuttings of his grandmother's magnolia tree. The guest list remained small, and neither family received authority over invitations or publicity. On the morning of the wedding, Margaret visited Jasmine privately and apologized without asking to be called family before Jasmine felt ready. Charles attended without making a speech, which required more restraint than anyone expected from him. Emily stood beside Jasmine at the entrance and whispered that this bride had finally approved her own ceremony. Jasmine laughed hard enough to soften the fear she had carried since waking. Their vows avoided promises about perfection. Alex promised to recognize when fear disguised itself as preparation, and to offer information before deciding whether Jasmine needed it. Jasmine promised to speak before independence, hardened into distance, and to remain open when disappointment tempted her to leave without conversation. Neither promised honesty would prevent pain. They promised to return to it after mistakes made honesty difficult. After the ceremony, Alex handed Jasmine the leather notebook he had carried during the original project. He had removed every page containing observations about her, leaving the binding nearly empty. "I thought we could use what is left for decisions we make together," he said. Jasmine opened to the first blank page and wrote 4 words. "Ask before assuming anything." She passed the notebook to Alex. Beneath her sentence, he added another. "Listen before building answers." They closed the book and placed it inside a drawer near the conservatory office, away from the guests and cameras. The moment did not require applause because the promise inside it would matter only on ordinary days when no one else could see whether they kept it. Outside, music began again, as friends waited beneath the glass ceiling, but Jasmine remained beside Alex for another quiet second. The first ceremony he designed had treated her future like something he could understand before she chose it. The life they now entered belonged equally to both of them. Not because love had made them flawless, but because they had learned that real commitment began wherever control ended, and two honest voices were finally allowed to answer each other.